"You're coming with me," said the lonely rancher to the woman beaten for giving birth to 3 girls. The wind howled through the high ridges of the Snowhorn Mountains, fierce and relentless, clawing its way through every crack and crevice of the land. It was late January 1877. A biting cold had settled over Wyoming territory, turning the world into a frozen wasteland. The land was quiet except for the angry gusts of wind and the snow, the kind of snow that comes down thick and fast, turning the earth into an unrecognizable blur of white. Each step in the snow was a reminder of the harshness of the world out here. There was no room for softness, no time for hesitation. Before we begin this journey, subscribe to Wild West Folk Tales for unforgettable stories from the heart of the American frontier, where love, survival, and justice find their home. Trust me, you won't want to miss the twists ahead. Now let's begin. Silas Granger rode through it all, his horse's hooves crunching through the deep snow, steady and unbothered by the freezing elements. His long, thick coat flapped against his legs as the biting winds cut through him, but he barely noticed. The loneliness of the land had long since numbed him to the cold. He had been out here for years, the isolated rancher of Snowhorn Ridge, a place where no one came unless they had nowhere else to go. And that suited Silas just fine. The quiet of the land matched his own silence, the solitude a constant companion. He was used to the wind, but something tugged at him, something deeper than the cold. It wasn't the howl of the wind that made him stop, nor the way the snow blanketed everything in its path. It was something else, something fragile, a sound, a cry. At first, it was faint, so faint it could have been nothing but the wind. But then it came again, clearer this time, a high-pitched wail, a baby's cry, and then another, and another. Silas's heart skipped a beat. No one came up this way. The nearest town was a half-day's ride, and it wasn't like anyone would be out here in the dead of winter. Not in the snowstorm. His horse plodded on, the animal's breath visible in the frigid air. He reined the horse to a stop, his eyes scanning the mountainside, ears straining against the wind. The sound was unmistakable, a child, no children. Multiple cries, weak but urgent. He dismounted, boots sinking deep into the snow with every step. His breath came in visible clouds, sharp and quick. There was no time to waste. The trail ahead wasn't ridden in days, but it was a path nonetheless, a scar cutting through the trees like a forgotten promise. He followed the path, moving quickly, the snow crunching beneath his feet, the howling wind gnawing at his face. The cries grew louder as he pushed forward, his heartbeat quickening. A clearing appeared through the trees, and Silas stepped into it without hesitation. And then he saw her, tied to an old fence post. The woman's body was barely recognizable. Her skin was torn, bruises blooming across her face like the aftermath of a thunderstorm. Her wrists were bound tightly with barbed wire, the sharp metal digging into her skin. Snow clung to her eyelashes, her hair frozen in place as if the cold had stolen her warmth. Her lips were cracked, pale as death, and at her feet, 3 bundles lay motionless, newborns. They were wrapped in what looked like the shredded remains of a nightgown. One baby whimpered weakly, but the others were silent. Silas dropped to his knees beside her without thinking. His calloused hands worked quickly to remove the barbed wire from her arms, the rusted metal tearing into her skin, but she didn't scream. She didn't flinch. She barely moved at all. "Don't let them take my daughters," she whispered, her voice barely a sound, more like a breath than words. Silas's heart slammed in his chest, but he didn't hesitate. He reached down, checking each baby carefully. Their skin was cold, too cold, but their breaths were shallow and steady. He scooped them up, one by one, tucking them into the warmth of his coat, wrapping them tightly in a wool blanket he had on his saddle. The smallest one whimpered as he secured it close, but the other 2 were still. The woman's head moved slightly, just enough to meet his gaze. Her eyes, once dull and distant, sparked with something, a faint glimmer of recognition, or maybe desperation. "You're coming with me," Silas said, his voice low and steady. His hands moved swiftly, supporting her as she swayed, her body limp against him. He didn't wait for an answer, didn't ask questions. There was no time for that. He wrapped his arms around her waist, careful but firm, and lifted her off the ground. She was light, too light. Her body seemed to collapse in his arms, as if she were made of nothing but bones and exhaustion. Her head rested against his chest, and Silas felt her shallow breaths against him, a reminder that time was running out. Without a second thought, Silas turned back toward the path, the snow falling heavier now, swirling around him like a blanket, the wind cutting sharper. His horse nickered anxiously nearby, but he ignored it, moving forward with a steady determination. It was a slow, grueling climb back up the mountain, but he made it. Step by step, he carried her, the babies tucked between them, the weight of their fragile lives heavier than the snow on his shoulders. The cabin came into view, barely visible in the storm. It was small, isolated, but it was home. For now, it would have to be enough. The fire inside had long since gone out, the warmth of the hearth lost to the biting cold. Silas kicked open the door, the wind howling behind him, and carried the woman inside. The babies came next, placed carefully in a basket near the hearth, their tiny bodies shaking but still alive. The cold had drained them, but Silas's steady hands warmed them, just as he warmed her. He worked quickly, stoking the fire, the crackling warmth of the flames slowly filling the cabin. His hands were rough, calloused, but they moved without hesitation, his focus singular. The woman, Marble, she had said, lay unconscious on a pile of quilts, her skin still cold to the touch. The babies stirred faintly, their breaths steady but shallow. The wind howled outside, but in the cabin, there was a fragile warmth, a flicker of life in the cold. Silas didn't speak. There were no words to say. His actions did the talking. He worked quietly, methodically, and when he finally finished, he sat near the hearth, watching over them as the fire grew stronger. He didn't know what had happened to her, or who had left her to die, but that didn't matter. What mattered now was that they were safe, at least for a moment. As the hours passed, and the storm outside raged on, the woman stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, Silas wasn't sure if she was seeing him or something far away, lost in her own thoughts. She turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. "My name's Marble, Marble Quinn." The words landed with a weight, but Silas didn't react. He didn't know who Joseph Quinn was, but something about her eyes, about the way she said it, struck him. He stood and crossed the room, his boots creaking on the floorboards as he moved. He had questions, but for now there was time for only silence. The storm outside continued to roar, but inside the cabin, something was changing. The next morning, the storm had finally passed, leaving the world covered in a blanket of snow. As Silas stepped outside to check the tracks, a figure appeared in the distance, a rider coming fast. His heart stopped. The man was dressed in dark, heavy clothing, riding hard through the snow, his horse kicking up the powder as it galloped. It was only when the man drew closer that Silas's chest tightened. He recognized the rider, Joseph Quinn. The rider came closer, his figure cutting through the bright snow like a dark shadow. Silas stood motionless, his boots planted firmly in the frozen earth, watching the man as he approached. His heart had stopped when he recognized the rider's silhouette against the pale morning sky, the way the man's horse galloped with urgency, the same as the wind that had rattled the mountains just hours before. Joseph Quinn. Silas didn't flinch. He didn't move, not even a muscle, despite the tightness in his chest. The snow continued to fall, the world cold and silent except for the pounding of hooves growing louder, the echo of fate drawing near. Joseph Quinn, the man who had left Marble to die, who had beaten her for giving birth to 3 daughters, the man who thought he owned her and his children. Silas clenched his jaw, but his expression remained unreadable. He had made a promise the night before, to protect Marble, to keep her safe from the hell that had chased her, from the man who had abandoned her. Joseph Quinn was no longer welcome here. As Quinn approached, Silas stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, meeting the rider's gaze with cold calm. His boots crunched in the snow, the sound of it sharp and distinct in the still morning air. Quinn's horse slowed, the beast stamping its hooves in the snow, as if sensing the tension in the air. The rider dismounted, his eyes cold and calculating, as they met Silas's without a flicker of recognition, only disdain. The snow crept around them, wrapping the two men in a hushed silence that was almost deafening. "You've got some nerve, Granger," Quinn sneered, his lips curling into a tight, condescending smile. "I'd have thought you'd be smarter than to get involved in matters that don't concern you." Silas's eyes never wavered, his grip tightening on the rifle slung over his shoulder. He wasn't intimidated, not by Quinn or anyone else. The man had made his move, and Silas would meet it head-on. "You're not welcome here, Quinn," Silas said, his voice low but firm, the words cutting through the cold as easily as a knife through butter. "This land doesn't belong to you, and neither do Marble and her daughters." A flicker of anger flashed in Quinn's eyes, but he quickly masked it with a smirk. "She's my wife, Granger. The law says I have every right to take her back." Silas took a step forward, never breaking eye contact. "That's where you're wrong. She's not yours. She never was." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of truth, and for a moment, the wind seemed to quiet, the mountains themselves pausing to listen. Quinn's smile faltered, just for an instant, before he wiped it away, his eyes narrowing into slits. "You've no right to keep her here," Quinn spat. "I'll take her back with me, and I'll deal with you later." Silas didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than words ever could. Quinn's hand moved to the holster at his side, fingers brushing the grip of the revolver. But before he could pull it free, Silas was already on him. In one smooth motion, Silas grabbed the rifle from his back and leveled it at Quinn, the barrel cold and unforgiving. Quinn froze, his hand halfway to his gun, his breath visible in the frigid air, his face twisting with disbelief. "You don't want to do this, Granger," Quinn warned, his voice strained. "You're making a mistake." Silas's eyes were unwavering, steady as the land itself. "You've made all the mistakes you're going to make, Quinn." He stepped closer, the rifle never wavering. "You're done. Stay away from her. Stay away from those girls." Quinn's eyes flickered to the side, as though calculating his next move, his hand inching closer to his gun. But before he could make a decision, the unmistakable sound of hooves approaching caught Silas's attention. He didn't turn, but Quinn did. The sheriff had arrived. Sheriff Mather rode into the clearing, flanked by two deputies, rifles raised and ready. Quinn's hand faltered over his gun, his eyes shifting from Silas to the lawman. His face twisted in a grimace of frustration, but there was no escaping the inevitable. The law was now here. "You're under arrest, Quinn," Sheriff Mather called out, his voice booming with authority. "For the assault, for the abandonment of your wife, and for the threats against this man's life." Quinn's face turned ashen, his eyes darting between the sheriff and Silas. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He took a step back as though readying himself to flee, but one of the deputies moved forward, his rifle trained on Quinn. "You're not going anywhere," the deputy said, his voice cold and final. "You're coming with us." For a moment, Quinn stood frozen, his fists clenched at his sides. And then, with a growl of frustration, he dropped his hand to his side and raised it, the pistol in his grip trembling slightly. But it was too late. The deputy's rifle fired, the sharp crack echoing through the snow-covered landscape. The shot hit the ground beside Quinn's feet, the warning clear and unwavering. Quinn's shoulders slumped, his hands raised in surrender. "I'll take my leave," he muttered, his voice low, filled with defeat. Sheriff Mather approached, his men falling in behind him. "You're coming with us?" the sheriff repeated. "We'll sort this out back in town." As Quinn was led away, Silas stood watching, the weight of what had just happened settling into his bones. The storm was finally over, but as he turned and made his way back toward the cabin, he knew that the fight was far from finished. Quinn would not be forgotten, nor would his threats. The battle for Marble and her daughters would continue, but for now, they were safe. He glanced toward the cabin, his heart heavy, but his mind clear. When Silas entered the cabin, the warmth of the fire greeted him, the crackling flames dancing against the dark walls. Marble was sitting up, cradling one of the babies in her arms, her tired eyes meeting his with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "They're gone," Silas said, his voice quieter now, a weight lifting from his shoulders. Marble nodded slowly, her lips trembling as she held the baby close. I didn't think I would ever see the end of it." Silas walked over, his gaze softening as he watched her. He didn't say anything at first. There were no words to be said. He simply knelt beside her, taking the baby from her arms and holding the small, fragile life gently. Marble watched him, her eyes filled with something Silas couldn't place. A gratitude, a relief, a quiet admiration. She took a deep breath, her hand resting on his shoulder as he sat beside her. "Thank you," she whispered. Silas didn't answer. He didn't need to. The quiet comfort between them spoke volumes. For the first time in what felt like years, the world outside the cabin felt a little less cold, a little less empty. There was warmth here now, a shared understanding, an unspoken bond that ran deeper than words could express. Thank you for following Silas and Marble's journey. If this story moved you, if you believe that in even the harshest places, love can grow, then make sure to subscribe to Wild West Folktales. Tap the bell so you never miss a story of survival, love, and redemption. There's more to come, so stay with us as we continue to share the untold tales of the American frontier. And with that, the story concludes, marking a new beginning for Silas and Marble as they stand united against whatever may come next. The fire crackled low, the warmth of the cabin a stark contrast to the storm still brewing outside. But inside, for the first time in years, peace had taken root.